The first time Mia saw the watermelon, it was cracked down the middle, its vibrant green skin split open to reveal the deep red flesh inside. It sat on the rickety wooden table in her grandmother's backyard, surrounded by the hum of cicadas and the faint scent of jasmine. Mia, at 10 years old, thought it looked like a heartbroken but still beating. Mia's world was small but full of life. Her grandmother's house was a sanctuary, a place where time moved slower and the air felt lighter. But even here, shadows lingered. Mia's parents had been arguing more than usual, their voices sharp and brittle, like glass shattering in the night. She had come to her grandmother's to escape, to find solace in the familiar rhythms of the countryside. Her grandmother, a woman with hands weathered by years of tending the earth, had a way of turning the simplest things into lessons. That day, it was the watermelon. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the cracked fruit. "It's not perfect, but it's still sweet. Sometimes, life cracks us open, but that's when we find out what we're made of." Mia frowned, not quite understanding. "But it's broken. Doesn't that mean it's ruined?" Her grandmother chuckled, a sound as warm as the sun on Mia's skin. "Ruined? No, child. Sometimes, the cracks let the sweetness out. You'll see." Mia didn't see, not then. But as the days passed, she began to notice the cracks in her own life. Her parents' arguments grew louder, their words sharper. She felt like the watermelon, split open and exposed. But where was the sweetness? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mia's grandmother handed her a slice of the cracked watermelon. The flesh was cool and juicy, the taste bursting with summer. "See," her grandmother said, her eyes twinkling. "Even broken things can be beautiful." Mia took a bite, the sweetness filling her mouth. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the cracks in her life could lead to something sweet too. But as the days turned into weeks, Mia's world began to unravel. Her parents' arguments escalated, and one night, her father left, his suitcase dragging behind him like a shadow. Mia felt the crack in her heart widen, and she wondered if it would ever heal. She turned to her grandmother, her eyes filled with tears. "What do I do now?" Her grandmother placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, her touch steady and sure. "You keep going, child. You find the sweetness, even in the cracks." Mia nodded, but inside, she felt lost. The watermelon lesson seemed too simple, too small to hold the weight of her pain. But as she looked at the cracked fruit on the table, she realized that maybe, just maybe, her grandmother was right. Maybe the cracks weren't the end, they were the beginning. And so, Mia began her journey, not knowing where it would lead but determined to find the sweetness in the broken pieces of her life. The first time Mia planted a watermelon seed, she didn't expect it to grow. She buried it in the soft earth of her grandmother's garden, her small hands pressing the soil down gently. "What if it doesn't come up?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Her grandmother smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You won't know unless you try." Mia's life had become a series of small, quiet moments. Her father's absence was a constant ache, a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. But in her grandmother's garden, she found a sense of peace. The earth was solid beneath her feet, the plants steady and predictable. She liked the way the sun warmed her back as she worked, the way the soil smelled after a rain. Her grandmother taught her how to care for the garden, how to listen to the plants, and understand their needs. "They're like people," she said one afternoon, as they weeded the rows of tomatoes. "They need love, attention, and a little bit of patience." Mia nodded, but inside, she wondered if she had enough patience to mend the cracks in her own life. Her mother had become distant, her smiles rare and fleeting. Mia missed the way things used to be, the way her family felt whole. One day, as they watered the garden, Mia noticed a small green shoot pushing through the soil where she had planted the watermelon seed. Her heart leaped with excitement. "It's growing!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with wonder. Her grandmother knelt beside her, her eyes soft with pride. "See? Sometimes, all it takes is a little faith. Mia watched the seedling grow, its leaves unfurling like tiny hands reaching for the sun. She felt a connection to the plant as if its growth mirrored her own. But as the days passed, she noticed something strange. The plant began to wilt, its leaves turning yellow and brittle. "What's wrong with it?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry. Her grandmother examined the plant, her brow furrowed in thought. "It needs more water," she said finally. "Sometimes, even the strongest plants need a little extra care." Mia nodded, determined to save the plant. She watered it diligently, her hands steady and sure. Slowly, the plant began to recover, its leaves turning green and vibrant once more. As she watched the plant grow, Mia realized that she, too, needed care. She had been so focused on holding herself together that she had forgotten to tend to her own needs. She began to take small steps to heal, to find the sweetness in her life. She started by writing in a journal, her thoughts spilling onto the pages like water. She wrote about her father, her mother, her fears, and her hopes. The words were messy and raw, but they helped her make sense of the cracks in her heart. She also began to spend more time with her mother, their conversations tentative but growing stronger with each passing day. They talked about the garden, about the watermelon plant, about the small joys that life still held. Slowly, Mia began to feel a sense of connection, a glimmer of hope. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, her mother turned to her, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I haven't been there for you like I should have been." Mia felt a lump rise in her throat, but she nodded, her heart swelling with love. "It's okay," she said. "We're still here. That's what matters." Her mother reached out, her hand warm and familiar. "We'll get through this," she said. "Together." Mia smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. She realized that the cracks in her life weren't the end, they were the beginning of something new, something beautiful. And as she looked at the watermelon plant, now strong and thriving, she knew that she, too, could grow through the cracks. The first time Mia saw the watermelon blossom, she thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The flower was small and delicate, its petals a soft yellow that seemed to glow in the sunlight. She knelt beside the plant, her heart swelling with pride. "It's going to make a watermelon," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Mia's life had begun to change in ways she hadn't expected. The cracks in her heart were still there, but they no longer felt like wounds, they felt like openings, places where light could get in. She had started to find joy in the small things, the sound of her mother's laughter, the feel of the sun on her skin, the taste of a ripe tomato fresh from the garden. But as the watermelon plant grew, so did Mia's challenges. The summer heat was relentless, the sun beating down on the garden with unyielding intensity. The plants began to wilt, their leaves curling in protest. Mia worked tirelessly to keep them alive, her hands calloused and her back sore from hours of labor. One afternoon, as she watered the garden, she noticed that the watermelon plant was struggling. The leaves were turning brown at the edges, and the blossom she had been so proud of was beginning to wither. She felt a pang of fear, a sense of helplessness that she hadn't felt in months. "What's wrong with it?" she asked her grandmother, her voice trembling with worry. Her grandmother examined the plant, her expression thoughtful. "It's the heat," she said finally. "The plant needs more water, but it also needs shade. Sometimes we have to protect the things we love from the things that can harm them." Mia nodded, determined to save the plant. She began to water it more frequently, and she built a small shade structure out of old sheets and sticks. Slowly, the plant began to recover, its leaves turning green and vibrant once more. As she worked, Mia realized that she, too, needed protection. She had been so focused on healing that she had forgotten to guard her heart. She began to set boundaries, to say no to things that drained her energy. She started to take time for herself, to rest and recharge. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset, her mother joined her, a cup of tea in her hand. They sat in silence for a while, the air between them warm and comfortable. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You've grown so much." Mia felt a lump rise in her throat, but she nodded, her heart swelling with love. "Thanks, Mom," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." Her mother reached out, her hand warm and familiar. "We're in this together," she said. "Always." Mia smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. She realized that the cracks in her life weren't the end, they were the beginning of something new, something beautiful. And as she looked at the watermelon plant, now strong and thriving, she knew that she, too, could grow through the cracks. The first time Mia held the watermelon in her hands, she felt a sense of accomplishment that she had never known before. The fruit was heavy and solid, its skin a deep green with streaks of lighter color running through it. She ran her fingers over the surface, feeling the ridges and bumps that told the story of its growth. Mia's life had come full circle. The cracks in her heart were still there, but they no longer felt like wounds. They felt like badges of honor, reminders of the strength she had found within herself. She had learned to find the sweetness in the broken pieces, to see the beauty in the imperfections. The watermelon plant had thrived under her care, its fruit growing larger and more vibrant with each passing day. Mia had watched it with a sense of pride, knowing that she had played a part in its growth. She had learned to nurture not only the plant but also herself, to find the balance between giving and receiving. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mia and her grandmother stood in the garden, the watermelon resting on the table between them. Mia felt a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something important was about to happen. "Are you ready?" her grandmother asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Mia nodded, her heart pounding with excitement. Her grandmother handed her a knife, and Mia took a deep breath before plunging it into the fruit. The knife slid through the flesh with ease, and the watermelon split open with a satisfying crack. The inside was a deep, vibrant red, the flesh juicy and sweet. Mia felt a surge of pride as she looked at the fruit, knowing that she had played a part in its creation. She cut a slice and handed it to her grandmother, who took a bite and smiled. "It's perfect," she said, her voice filled with pride. Mia took a bite herself, the sweetness filling her mouth. She felt a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that she had finally found the sweetness in the cracks of her life. As they sat on the porch, eating watermelon and watching the sunset, Mia felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. She realized that the cracks in her life weren't the end, they were the beginning of something new, something beautiful. And as she looked at the watermelon, now a symbol of her journey, she knew that she, too, could grow through the cracks. Life's cracks and imperfections are not the end, they are opportunities for growth, resilience, and finding the sweetness within. Just like the cracked watermelon, we can thrive and find beauty in our brokenness.